Britain has a long history stretching back thousands of years. In every part, at some point, a bloody or mysterious event has taken place. Murders, bloodthirsty revenge, plagues, punishment and folklore will make your flesh creep in terror. This is Mysterious Britain, Tales of the Unknown. Newgate prison was built in 1188 and was notorious for being Britain's worst prison. For hundreds of years, inmates suffered from cruel punishments and starvation, until it was finally closed in 1902 and demolished 2 years later. Over the prison's lifetime, stories have come to light of ghosts, murder and cannibalism. All manner of criminals were imprisoned at Newgate. Some committed acts of petty crime and theft, breaking and entering homes or committing highway robberies, while others performed serious crimes such as rapes and murders. Upon their arrival in Newgate, prisoners were chained and led to the appropriate dungeon for their crime. Those who had been sentenced to death stayed in a cellar beneath the keeper's house, which was called Limbo. It was essentially an open sewer, lined with chains and shackles. Common debtors were sent to the stone hall, whereas common criminals were taken to the stone hold. The dungeons were dirty and unlit, so deprived that physicians would not enter for fear of catching a disease. Conditions did not improve with time. Prisoners were made to pay for their keep at the prison, and those who could afford to purchase alcohol from the prisoner-run drinking cellar by the main entrance to Newgate remained constantly drunk. There were lice everywhere, and jailers left prisoners chained to the wall to languish and starve. The moaning of the half-dead prisoners echoed through the dark passages. Later on in the prison's history, prisoners would report seeing ghosts, past jailers who came back to terrorise them. One report was of the ghost of a rotting corpse who would slowly walk towards its victim, its bare feet slapping against the cold stone. This grotesque spirit would bite its chosen victim, who would then suffer from a plague-like illness and die a few days after. One ghost said to have haunted the prison was Edmund Lorimer, who was among the most notorious keepers in the Middle Ages. He was infamous for charging inmates 4 times the legal limit for the removal of their irons, and was said to manifest to shake chains and deprive prisoners of sleep, sending them mad. Perhaps the most infamous apparition is of a black dog. The earliest recording account of this legend dates from 1596 and is credited to a prison inmate called Luke Hutton. The legend recounts that during a famine in the reign of King Henry III of England, a scholar was incarcerated in Newgate prison who had the reputation of being a sorcerer, and who had done much hurt to the king's subjects with his charms and witchcraft. The famine was so severe and the conditions so bad that during this terrible period the prisoners had already resorted to cannibalism, and soon after the sorcerer's arrival they killed and consumed his body. Shortly after this crime was committed, the inmates guilty of his death reportedly began seeing the ghost of a monstrous black dog walking up and down the prison, which they were convinced was the sorcerer's spirit returning to avenge himself upon his murderers. One by one, this spirit took its revenge on those responsible for his death, until the last survivors, driven mad by fear, broke out of the gaol and escaped. In 1783, the site of London's gallows was moved from Tyburn to Newgate. Public executions outside the prison continued to draw large crowds. The gallows were constructed outside a door in Newgate Street for public viewing. Dense crowds of thousands of spectators would pack the streets to see these events, and in 1807 dozens died at a public execution when part of a crowd of 40,000 spectators collapsed in a human crush. A total of 1,169 people were executed at the prison, and right up to the day Newgate's prison closed its doors, prisoners testified to its hauntings. Death by boiling is a method of execution in which a person is killed by being immersed in boiling liquid. While not as common as other methods of execution, boiling to death has been practiced in many parts of Europe and Asia. Due to the lengthy process, death by boiling is an extremely painful method of execution. In England, the 9th statute passed in 1531 made boiling alive the prescriptive form of capital punishment for murder committed by poisoning, which by the same act was defined as high treason. This arose from an incident in February 1531 in which the Bishop of Rochester's cook, Richard Rose, gave several people poisoned porridge, resulting in 2 deaths. Richard was arrested and tortured until he made a confession. He was sentenced to a ghastly execution of being boiled alive. A contemporary chronicle reports what followed. He roared mighty loud, and women who were big with child did feel sick at the sight of what they saw, and they were carried away half dead, and other men and women did not seem frightened by the boiling alive, but would prefer to see the headman at his work. Boiling to death was employed again in 1542 for a woman named Margaret Davy. Margaret was in the employ of a wealthy merchant and served as a household maid. According to Margaret, the family she served were cruel and would often beat her. Having taken all she could, Margaret poisoned the dinner soup and served it to the family. All died, and Margaret fled, only to be later captured and found guilty of murder by poison. Margaret pled for her life, telling anyone that would listen about her mistreatment at the family's hands, but her pleas fell on deaf ears, and she was led to her place of execution, opposite the house of her victims. Kicking and screaming, Margaret was led to her place of execution, where she was then suspended above a large cauldron of boiling water. Her last words were for mercy, but the gathered crowd jeered her, and she was lowered and raised until dead. As she was raised for the last time, her chest burst open, and her heart flew out and hit the house of her victim. Marjorie Hilton was better known as Meg Shelton, the flayed hag, and was infamously accused of witchcraft. Local farmers of Wood Plumpton in Lancashire believed that Meg could transform herself into a stalk of corn, and causing illness to their cattle, which caused their milk to sour. The house in which Meg lived was said to be possessed by demons, and many claimed to have seen a foul-smelling vapour rising from the chimney. One night there arose a great calamity of noise from her house, demonic moans and screams. The morning after, she was found dead in her cottage, crushed between a wall and a large barrel. Meg was hastily buried in St Anne's Church, and the locals believe that was the end of the witch. However, after her death, her corpse would keep digging up to the surface, where it would then terrorise the cattle that she had in life. The locals would rebury the corpse several times, until finally, to prevent her from rising again, they buried her head down in a narrow shaft and had a large boulder placed on top of it. To this date, the boulder remains in place, and locals believe that so long as it does, Meg will not rise again.